But first, Australia has pressed its case at the United Nations for election as a temporary member of the Security Council. Addressing the General Assembly, Prime Minister Gillard cited Australia's commitment to the ideals of the UN, including peacekeeping, development aid and international security. She also promoted her country as a successful, multicultural and multi-faith nation. Political editor Catherine McGrath reports.
Lobbying for votes in the United Nations is no easy project, and while Australia is quietly hopeful, nothing can be guaranteed. In her address to United Nations General Assembly, Prime Minister Gillard made Australia's case.
Australia's ideals in the world are those of the UN, and Australians know the practical value of the UN's work. This is why Australia seeks to serve in all the work of the UN and on the Security Council.
The Prime Minister said that Australia is one of the world's largest contributors to educational aid and has a strong record in UN peacekeeping.
We are a country of the Asia Pacific, a neighbour to developing countries with a perspective of both the North and the South. We are a state with a decades-long tradition of capable and committed work in the United Nations.
The vote by secret ballot takes place in 3 weeks.
It's close and it'll go right down to the wire, so we've got to be there putting Australia's case.
By carrying the 5-power resolution...
The United Nations replaced the League of Nations after the Second World War, and the Security Council was allocated the role of maintaining international peace with the power to order military action by passing UN resolutions.
The Security Council is the core of the international law enforcement system and the only body in the world that has the legal authority to make the big judgment calls and decisions on war and peace.
The Security Council consists of 5 permanent members. Each have a veto power: China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom and the United States. There are also 10 non-permanent members. The military intervention in East Timor was sanctioned by the UN Security Council. So was the UN role in Cambodia and Afghanistan. The first Iraq war was sanctioned, the second wasn't. The most recent international crises of Libya and Syria have been before the Security Council. In the case of Libya, Russia and China abstained and the action was sanctioned. In the case of Syria, Russia and China used their veto to block military intervention. This week, the Security Council has held high-level meetings again on Syria. The 18-month-long conflict has claimed approximately 27,000 lives.
In Syria, the conflict has become a threat to regional and international peace and security. A human tragedy is unfolding.
4 times in the past, Australia has held a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council. The last time was in 1985, and the bid in 1996 failed. The current campaign is a costly exercise. Australia's boosted its aid to Africa as part of its efforts and been lobbying in the Asia-Pacific region for votes. Australia's chances are rated as strong, but not guaranteed. In international diplomacy, influence is the key to power, and if Australia is successful, its international influence will be enhanced. Conversely, if it doesn't win, the bid will be perceived as a diplomatic failure.
If we sat on the Security Council, it would increase our leverage, it would increase our prestige, we would get to have our say on issues that matter both directly and indirectly.
I think we've run a pretty good and effective campaign, bearing in mind that we came in late, bearing in mind that we don't have a natural bloc. I think we have appealed in terms of our credentials and what we can contribute, rather than on a sense of entitlement.
Australia's competing in the Western Europe and Others group against Luxembourg and Finland. Luxembourg began campaigning in 2001 and Finland started the year after that.
We have to do some more good things with the United Nations.
Australia announced its intention to campaign 4 years ago.
Australia will be seeking election to the United Nations Security Council for 2013-2014.
The votes are cast by the 193 members of the United Nations. Australia needs 2/3 of that, a total of 128 votes.
Like any election in any field, there are a range of people who make up their mind very early, there are a range of people who make up their mind closer in, and there are some who don't make up their mind until they're actually putting the pen to the paper.
Australia's bid has one very clear problem to overcome. It hasn't received strong and unanimous political support in this country. The opposition believes that the campaign has cost too much money and led the government to ignore political relationships closer to home. And as the Prime Minister campaigned in New York, opposition leader Tony Abbott emphasised his position.
All other things being equal, yes, better that we're on the Security Council than off it, but it was never worth the $40 million plus that this government has spent just to win a bronze medal at the United Nations.
At the UN, the Prime Minister spoke of Australia's commitment to the Millennium Development Goals and announced she'd taken the role of co-chair of the MDG's advocacy group alongside Rwanda. There are just 3 years left to achieve the ambitious targets set in the year 2000 to improve world poverty, particularly in health, sanitation, food security, agriculture and education. The MDG's advocacy group met in New York to assess priorities.
We discussed in the room the deployment of community health workers, and there was a great deal of discussion in the room as well on the need to make sure we are focused on sanitation, on safe drinking water, on sanitation, given the lack of both is such a big driver of preventable disease.
Australia is one of the few countries increasing its aid budget during the global financial crisis.